There's a line from a Paul Simon song, The Boxer, that goes, "After changes upon changes, we are more or less the same. After changes, we are more or less the same." And that certainly does seem to be the state of play in today's gospel, in which Luke depicts Jesus as a kind of second Moses, changed, but also the same. Consider the evidence. As he's transfigured up on a mountain, Jesus glows just like Moses does on Mount Sinai in our Old Testament reading today. The disciples want to build dwellings or booths, just as the Israelites did during their years with Moses in the wilderness. God even calls Jesus God's chosen, a word unique to Luke and a designation used for the Israelites in the Old Testament, from which we get the chosen people. And then, of course, Jesus is actually joined by Moses and Elijah, who discuss his upcoming departure in Jerusalem, also a word, departure, which only Luke uses, and which in Greek is the same as the word for Exodus. And indeed, Jesus comes off the mountain and does set his face toward Jerusalem, leading the disciples on a kind of exodus out of their enslavement to selfishness and fear and toward the promised land of new life beyond the cross. That's how it's supposed to work anyway, right? Because epiphanies and revelations change people. God's mountaintop appearance to Moses is supposed to change the Israelites, forging a covenant to make them more faithful to God and more just and more kind to the vulnerable among them, because God has liberated them from slavery in Egypt. One would expect a similar transformation out of Jesus's transfiguration before Peter, James, and John. And yet, when you read the story of the Hebrew people as recorded in the Hebrew Bible, from Exodus on into the centuries that follow, it becomes clear that you may be able to take the Israelites out of Egypt, but it's a lot harder to take Egypt out of the Israelites. They carry their enslavements with them. They are so ornery and human. They keep falling back into the worship of idols, such as the golden calves. They complain that they want to go home where the food was good, even if they were in slavery. And as the centuries pass, they continue to ignore the plight of the poor and the widows and orphans and foreigners among them. After changes upon changes, they're more or less the same. And so it is in our gospel. After their mountaintop experience, the disciples also go right back to their old habits. For lack of faith, they fail to cast out a spirit who has seized, mauled, and dashed to the ground a man's only son. And of course, this language foreshadows how God's only son will soon be seized, mauled, and dashed to the ground as well. Like the 12 tribes of Israelites, these 12 disciples abandon and betray their Lord, proving that after changes upon changes, they too are more or less the same. And so it has been right down to the very moment at hand. Europe has enjoyed an unprecedented mountaintop experience of peace and stability. No sovereign nation has invaded another on that continent for almost 80 years. Surely, one mountaintop moment in that time period arrived in 1989 as civilians began to dismember the Berlin Wall with picks and sledgehammers and even their bare hands. crowds cheering on either side as it came down and people started to climb over and reunite across that line, that iron curtain. Europeans might be excused for having thought, like Peter, James, and John, that they could build dwellings in that holy peace and live forever. I certainly didn't anticipate that I would see another authoritarian launch another war of choice on that continent with his tanks and his missiles and his predators' taste for carnage. But friends, like Jesus and the disciples, we come down from the mountaintop to set our faces towards Jerusalem and the cross, towards human nature, human will to power that is untransformed. We come down the mountain to do the work we are given to do. We come down into a world where no diplomacy, no UN resolution, no sanction can cast out the spirit that even now will seize, maul, and dash the innocent to the ground. We come and forget the grace that we witnessed up there. We get scared as the disciples got scared, and we prove once again that after changes upon changes, we are more or less the same. After changes, we are more or less the same. What's the implication of that? When God grants us a vision of the promised land, the kingdom of peace and justice, and we soon lose it, does that make the vision a lie or a joke? Are the transformational moments we experience individually and collectively just a matter of cosmetics, a light and mirror show, masking the truth that we're broken and finite, that we fail to varying degrees and death comes to us all? Or do they tap into something deeper and more real than the cruelty and barbarism that seems so rooted in human nature? If I could answer those questions for sure, we wouldn't call it faith. But here's what I can say. The gospel does not intend the transfiguration of Jesus to be a joke. It is a radiant moment of truth, because as dark as is the end towards which the Jesus community is moving, there is something beyond it. At the end of that end, the Bible promises us there is a new beginning. Death and despair do not get the final word. The transfiguration of Christ and all the smaller moments in the world that partake of its glory. The Russian tennis stars who voiced their protest, the nerdy Ukrainian accountants and middle-aged Ukrainian mothers taking up arms to protect their homeland, the demonstrations for peace in Brazil and Thailand and Mexico and Greece and Georgia, and most courageous of all, Russia itself. These rare and sustaining glimpses of light are weighted towards hope. They carry with them the possibility that, as Wallace Stevens puts it, after the final no, there comes a yes. And on that yes, the future world depends. Amen.